I was reminded again of the devastation of the fall. That's a theological term for when mankind took a right turn away from the path that God had clearly laid out for us. Just the hate, if you've been somewhat in touch with the happenings, then you're probably very much aware. So it's a somber way to look back at this past week. But how can I go on into pragmatics without talking about?
Hey, before we jump into the podcast, we want to thank all our donors and supporters who make the Today Count show possible. It's through your generosity that we're able to shape leaders through this content and this podcast. And be sure to like, subscribe, and follow wherever you find yourself coming across this content. All right, let's get to the podcast.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jim Piper. I am the host of the Today Count show. My vision for this podcast is to discuss everything important about life and leadership. And it does come from a Christian worldview, an informed theology, hopefully an informed psychology, as well as leadership principles for business, ministry, nonprofit work. But basically, and at the core, at the center, I guess you could say, it's really a podcast about self-leadership. Now we have 3 channels on the same podcast. At the same URL, you will find a list of episodes. It's called the Genesis Project, and that is me and a few of my friends are reading through the book of Genesis and collaborating together what meaning it has for us today and how to apply it. The second is a channel of long form interviews where we are generally discussing leadership, where we'll have special guests on and we will look at their interests, the work that they're doing, and see what we can glean from those. Today, I introduce a third channel, a third avenue. And this one I'm going to call basically, again, what this podcast is about: life and leadership, or this week in life and leadership. Now, that implies that I'll be recording this short episode on a weekly basis. I don't think that will be true. It might be true, but I kind of doubt it. But I do want to, I have a passion to share this with you because it has a really simple format. One, it's a solo podcast. It's just me talking to you. Secondly, what I'm doing is I'm reviewing the past week or so of life in general and in leadership in general, looking at what I've observed, what I'm learning, what I could do better, maybe how you might be able to learn from that too, with hopefully a solid coaching wisdom for all of us to practice. So without further ado, the events recently that have happened in, I guess I'll call it South Central Texas, what we all who live here call the Hill Country. As you, I'm sure, are aware, we had a good amount of rain, but we had flash floods and many lives were lost. At the time of this recording, we still don't know the full impact of what has happened. What has surprised me this week, and I don't know why I say surprise, I think because I tend to lean optimistically in the way that I view people and the way that I view lives, and how we handle life. But as I was on one of my walk/run, it really looks like somebody's been shot that's trying to get to safety, but I tried to do it as often as I can, 4 or 5 days a week, sometimes 6 days a week. And I was listening to some of the things on social media, and it was really disappointing how clearly the human condition is so broken. Using this event to create whatever political, religious, personal platform to spew all kinds of stuff. Now, I recognize that a lot of it comes from emotion. A lot of it comes from our wounds and why we say things that are unbecoming, why we use a platform, various social media platforms to do that. But it just constantly reminded me of how much the Bible talks about the tongue and controlling the tongue. You know, sometimes we label certain people as emotional and some people as not emotional, and that's a fallacy. That's a joke. Every human being is emotional, and being self-aware, understanding what our triggers are, and why we would, without having all the information, why we would say things that are just so unbecoming and destructive. I just have to be honest with you, was a real downer for me over that weekend and even in the beginning of this new week. I was reminded again of the devastation of the fall. That's a theological term for when mankind took a right turn away from the path that God had clearly laid out for us, which of course, we learn about in the Genesis project on this podcast. And and of course, by saying this, it has a way of elevating myself, doesn't it? And so let's get rid of that right now. I know that my human condition is broken as well. So I'm not simply pointing my finger at humanity and saying you're broken. I'm saying we're broken. That's what I'm saying. So it's a somber way to look back at this past week. But how can I go on into pragmatics without talking about what really matters, the heart of things? So I was pretty bummed out about that. And to be frank, I still kind of am bummed out. Just the hate and this. I mean, I don't want to go into that. If you've been somewhat in touch with the happenings, then you're probably very much aware of how ignorant and insensitive we as humans can be.
There have been seasons in my life where I've looked back and I thought, what was that even about? Did I grow in that season? Did I get better? Am I still stuck in that season? If you have similar thoughts, I want to introduce you to a book called Story, The Art of Learning from Your Past. This book, written by Jim Piper, shares principles and stories that actually help us get unstuck and step into the future we've always wanted. Be sure to stop by leadtodaycommunity.com to grab your copy today.
All right, let's change channels to the second topic. So I wanted to talk about the tragedies and more so what it has revealed. Unfortunately, it's also revealed a lot of good things, right, with folks, but just the noise has been so negative. Second thing I want to talk about is really a discipline that I try to encourage all of those who are part of the Lead Today community, which is, look back to evaluate so that you can pre-plan and make pre-decisions for the following week. And as you do that on a regular basis, you will find it'll help you live with more joy, live with more peace, live with more productivity, to be more successful in what you're trying to do, as well as keeping yourself healthy. So, looking at my calendar last week, this is what it taught me. Last week, I had 17 scheduled appointments. I guess I would ask you, how many appointments did you have last week? Now, granted, I couldn't answer that off the top of my head, but that's why I went back and looked at my calendar. I mean, 17 appointments for some people might be a light week, might be a really heavy week. It's moderately heavy for me. So I had 17 scheduled appointments ranging from coaching and speaking to time with family and friends. And that did not include the 5 blocks that I carved out for exercise, reading, and prayer. Looking back, the pace, I would say it was full, but it wasn't frantic. It was productive. It was not overwhelming. And why? Well, it's because last week, I had planned in detail in the previous 2 weeks leading up to that week. I took plan to evaluate what I'm learning about my time. For example, I tend to lean a little bit more introverted. So when I am heavy in appointments with people, I know that on the other side of those appointments, I need to be involved in filling activities, emotionally filling activities, which for me is doing something with my hands. It is watching an inspiring movie. It is exercise. It is reading. It's those kinds of things, laughing, those kinds of things. So anyway, I took the time to evaluate, to plan, and to protect margin. Margin is so important to create in your time. I bet you a lot. I mean, let me just ask you, when you work on your calendar for next week, are you actually penciling in margin? Or are you just hoping to have margin, have space? I would encourage you to make sure that you are actually blocking margin for your week. This week, what I'd like to do is I'd like to do some encouraging and a coaching insight for you. So, being that I shared all the stuff that has happened in Texas, and then we just took a quick look at my calendar, and though I did not pull a lot of learning out of my calendar this week, it's because this week was a good week. I did it pretty well. Now, on this podcast, you will hear me sometimes say, "Oh, here's what I did wrong here. Here's what I did wrong here." So hopefully you'll stay in tune with this particular avenue of the Today Count show. But the third thing I want to do is share a coaching insight for you. Well, we live in a world pregnant with anxiety, with anger and fear, stress and brokenness. I had already commented on that before. And if you try to keep up with it, if you try to fix all of that, it will own you. If you've listened to this podcast long enough, or you've been a part of the Lead Today community long enough, we call that quadrant 1. Just everything is important and everything is urgent. And that will burn you out. That will cause you to create all kinds of bad habits to cope. And it will send you down a path that is just so unhealthy in so many different ways. So your goal shouldn't be to stay on top of everything, to stay up to date with everything. Instead, aim to live and work at a different pace. Let me say it a different way. Think of it as a different time zone. What I like about living in the central time zone is, for my friends and clients that I work with on a weekly basis who are in Pacific time, I get a 2-hour head start. I get a 2-hour head start, as if I can do what I need to do and then be in a posture of waiting for them. That's kind of, the idea that I'm trying to share here. So how do you do that though? Well, first, I've already mentioned it several times, step back and evaluate. When I take the time to evaluate last week in preparation for next week, it slows me down. It slows me down on purpose. And most of us need to slow down. And then what I do, as again, I mentioned earlier, I plan my week with margin in mind. You know that planning matters, but you also know that plans get interrupted. That's life. That's how it works. But those interruptions should never cause you to stop planning, because the more you plan and execute and evaluate, the more you'll learn, so that less and less of those interruptions happens to you and to your calendar. And then finally, move forward with calm intention. In other words, you've got the week planned out. You've already made decisions, predetermined decisions. You know what this all reminds me of? It reminds me of a golfing principle that was shared with me, and it's pretty popular, I think. It goes like this: slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Now, you may or may not play golf. When I was growing up, I didn't play golf. I played baseball and I wrestled along with some other sports, but I never played golf. So when they finally put a golf club in my hand, I was a banker at the time, a business banker. And so it was kind of normal to have client relationships where you would spend time out on the golf course. So I never took a lesson. And so I gripped that golf club like a baseball bat. And, the wrestler in me just thought, basic common sense, the harder you swing, the further the ball will go. But I found that that's not exactly true. It's kind of true, but it's not true. They do test your swing speed, but it's how you get to that speed that makes all the difference. So when you're trying to develop a golf swing, you go slow. I mean, you really go slow. And as you go slow, you create mental patterns. You create a habit of that swing, a good habit. And then as you do that, your swing becomes smoother and smoother and smoother, and your speed continues to get faster. And that can be applied into our lives in self-leadership. So when I think about what I'm sharing with you and how to wrap this week up, says, so to move forward with calm intention, that's smooth, and smooth eventually becomes fast in the ways that matter most. In other words, when you evaluate and when you plan and when you execute, and when you evaluate and you plan and you execute, that's what you're doing. You're slowing down on purpose. You're learning things and therefore getting things out more smoothly. And the more you do that, the faster and the more you will get done. And you'll do it in the manners and in the subjects and in the ways that are most important.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us on the Today Counts show. We got so much more planned for you. So stay tuned and stay connected on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. And remember, today counts.
I was reminded again of the devastation of the fall. That's a theological term for when mankind took a right turn away from the path that God had clearly laid out for us. Just the hate. If you've been somewhat in touch with the happenings, then you're probably very much aware. So it's a somber way to look back at this past week. But how can I go on into pragmatics without talking about